The shuttle descended through layers of shimmering energy fields, carrying its passengers toward the most prestigious institution in the known galaxy. Deho pressed his face against the window, watching as the Galactic Neural Academy came into view. It was massive, a floating structure of crystalline towers and metallic rings that spun slowly in the void of space. Lights flickered across its surface like thoughts firing through neurons. He was the only human on the shuttle. The other passengers belonged to species he had only read about in databases. A Krillian student sat 2 rows ahead, her skin reflecting light like a prism. Across the aisle, a Vorthian checked his neural interface, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence. Nobody spoke to Deho. They barely looked at him. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, still considered newcomers to the interstellar community. The Academy had existed for over 300 years, serving as the ultimate testing ground for young minds across the galaxy. Every species that joined the Galactic Council sent their brightest students here. The reason was simple: the mind probe test. It was said that if you could pass the test, you could handle anything the universe threw at you. Deho's hands trembled slightly as the shuttle docked. He had prepared for this moment for 2 years, ever since Earth's diplomatic corps had offered him the scholarship. The orientation hall was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. Thousands of students gathered there, representing hundreds of species. Deho felt very small. A holographic display materialized above the crowd, showing the face of Headmaster Quelvreth. The headmaster was old beyond measure, a being of pure telepathic energy contained within a vaguely humanoid form. His voice resonated not through sound but directly in their minds. "Welcome to the Galactic Neural Academy," Quelvreth's thoughts echoed. "You are here because your worlds believe you possess exceptional minds. This week you will face the mind probe test. For 3 centuries, this test has measured the strength, clarity, and resilience of consciousness itself. Many species have attempted it. All have succeeded to varying degrees. The test does not judge intelligence. It judges stability." The hologram shifted, showing images of the testing chamber. It looked simple enough. A spherical room with floating nodes that would connect to the subject's neural pathways. But Deho knew it was more complicated than that. The probe didn't just scan surface thoughts. It dove deep into memory, organizing and analyzing every experience, every emotion, every fragment of consciousness. Most students completed it in 4 to 6 hours. The failure rate was less than 2% across all species. "Your testing slots have been assigned," Quelvreth continued. "Prepare yourselves. What the probe reveals about your mind will shape your future in ways you cannot yet imagine." The hologram faded. The crowd began to disperse. Deho checked his personal device and felt his stomach drop. He was scheduled for the final day of testing 5 days away. That meant 5 days of waiting. 5 days of watching other students emerge from the chamber either triumphant or broken. His assigned quarters were small but comfortable. He had barely finished unpacking when the door chimed. His roommate had arrived. Tejin was a Vorthian, tall and lean with smooth blue skin and those distinctive 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. He carried himself with obvious confidence. "You must be the human," Tejin said, his translator device rendering his words into perfect English. "I've never met one of your kind before. Are you nervous about the test?" "A little," Deho admitted. "Don't be. The probe is fair. It simply reads what's there. If your mind is organized, you'll do fine." Tejin smiled, showing teeth that were slightly too sharp. "I'm tested in 3 days. I expect to finish in under 4 hours." Over the next few days, Deho tried to prepare, though he wasn't sure how anyone could prepare for something like this. He attended lectures about neural interface safety. He practiced meditation techniques recommended by the Academy's wellness instructors. Mostly he watched as other students took the test. Mion was the first to become famous. She was Krillian, and Krillians were known for having the most organized minds in the galaxy. Their neural pathways formed crystalline structures, perfect and precise. When she entered the testing chamber, the observers in the Academy's common areas watched on public displays. The probe activated, and data began flowing across screens in neat, orderly streams. 3 hours and 12 minutes later, Mion emerged. Her face was calm, almost serene. The display showed her results: perfect coherence, 0 anomalies, exceptional stability. She had set a new Academy record. Students from her world celebrated. Other species looked worried. Setting the curve that high on the first day made everyone else's task harder. Deho met her by chance in the Academy's garden. a biodome that recreated environments from various worlds. She was sitting alone, watching crystal formations grow in accelerated time. "Congratulations," he said. "Everyone's talking about your test." "Thank you." She turned to look at him, her prismatic eyes catching the light. "You're the human student." "Deho, correct?" "That's me. When is your test?" "2 more days." Mion nodded slowly. "The probe is not difficult if you understand what it wants. It seeks order, clarity. My people's minds are structured like these crystals. Everything in its place, every memory cataloged, every emotion stored separately from facts. The probe found exactly what it expected. What if your mind isn't like that?" Deho asked. "Then the probe will work harder. It will take longer, but it will find the order eventually. All minds have order, even if it's buried deep." She paused. "Don't they?" Deho didn't answer because he wasn't sure. Taejin took his test the next day. Deho watched from the common area along with dozens of other students. The Vorthian's test lasted 4 hours and 7 minutes. When he emerged, he looked exhausted but proud. His coherence scores were excellent, well above average. That night he returned to their quarters and collapsed on his bed. "It's intense," he said, staring at the ceiling. "The probe goes through everything. Every memory since childhood. It organizes them, categorizes them, measures how stable your emotional responses are. I felt it separating my feelings from my experiences, analyzing them independently. It's invasive but not painful." "Did it find anything unexpected?" Deho asked. "No, that's the point. Vorthian minds compartmentalize naturally. Emotions in one section, facts in another, skills in a third. The probe found what it expected to find." Taejin turned his 3 eyes toward Deho. "What are human minds like?" "I've never heard anyone discuss your species' cognitive structure. Honestly, I'm not sure we have a structure. Not the way you're describing. Every mind has structure. That's what consciousness is." Deho didn't argue, but doubt gnawed at him. The day before his test, he met with Instructor Hiram. She was Silenthian, a species known for empathic abilities. Her role was to monitor students' psychological well-being throughout the testing process. Her office was warm and filled with soft light. "How are you feeling, Deho?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Nervous. That's natural. But I want you to understand something. The test cannot harm you. It can only reveal what's already there." "What if what's there is messy?" Hiram smiled. "All minds are messy in their own way. The probe's job is to find the pattern in the mess. Trust in yourself. Your species wouldn't have sent you here if they didn't believe you could handle this." That night, Deho couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed listening to Taijin's rhythmic breathing and tried to organize his thoughts. He attempted to categorize his memories the way Mion had described. Childhood in one box, school in another, family here, friends there. But it didn't work. Every memory connected to a dozen others. His grandmother's face led to her kitchen, which led to the smell of cooking, which led to a specific winter day, which led to a fight with his brother, which led to reconciliation, which led to his brother's wedding, which led to... Everything was tangled together. There was no order. There was just everything all at once. Morning came too quickly. Deho walked to the testing center feeling like he was walking toward his own execution. The chamber doors opened automatically. Inside, the spherical room waited, nodes floating in precise geometric patterns. Headmaster Quelvreth and Instructor Hiram watched from the control room through transparent walls. "Please sit in the center," Quelvreth's thought touched Deho's mind. He sat. The nodes drifted closer, forming a cage of light around him. He felt the first touch of the probe against his consciousness, gentle as a whisper, then it dove deeper. And everything changed. The first hour went smoothly. In the control room, Instructor Hiram monitored the flowing data streams while Headmaster Quelvreth observed with his ancient consciousness. The probe had initiated contact with Deho's neural pathways and begun its standard mapping protocol. Green indicators pulsed steadily across the monitoring screens. Everything appeared normal. "Initial scan complete," the probe's artificial intelligence announced in a neutral voice. "Beginning deep memory access. Subject appears stable. Commencing standard categorization." Hiram watched Deho through the transparent wall. He sat motionless in the center of the chamber, eyes closed, breathing steady. The floating nodes around him pulsed with gentle light as they worked. She had monitored hundreds of these tests. This looked like all the others. Then the first warning appeared on her screen. It was small, easy to miss. a yellow indicator flickering in the emotional mapping section. Hiram frowned and tapped the display to expand the details. The probe was reporting difficulty separating emotional content from factual memory. That was unusual but not unprecedented. Some species had stronger emotional integration than others. She made a note and continued observing. 5 minutes later, 3 more yellow indicators appeared. Then 7. Then 12, Kelvreth, Hiram said quietly. Are you seeing this? The headmaster's presence intensified in the room. I am. The probe is struggling with categorical separation. Curious, run a diagnostic check. Hiram's fingers flew across the interface. Probe systems are functioning perfectly. The issue isn't technical. It's the subject's memory structure. The AI can't find clean boundaries between memory types. Every mind has boundaries, Quelvreth said, but his tone held a note of uncertainty. The second hour brought more complications. The probe's AI was designed to work efficiently, categorizing memories into standard types: factual, emotional, sensory, procedural. But Deho's memories refused categorization. When the probe accessed his memory of learning to ride a bicycle as a child, it expected to find a procedural memory with some attached emotional tags. Instead, it found something incomprehensible. The memory contained the physical sensation of balancing. Yes, but it was inseparable from the sound of his father's encouraging voice, the smell of summer grass, the fear of falling, the pride of success, and somehow also the sadness of seeing that same bicycle years later, rusted in a garage. All of this existed as a single unified memory. The probe attempted to separate these elements, but doing so seemed to damage the memory's integrity. Warning alerts began cascading across the screens. The probe reported that it was encountering recursive emotional loops in nearly every memory it accessed. Hiram had never seen anything like it. She pulled up comparative data from other species tests. Krillians stored emotions in separate crystalline structures, accessible but distinct from factual memory. Forthians compartmentalized naturally, keeping feelings in designated neural sectors. Even Silenthians, who experienced intense empathy, maintained clear boundaries between their own emotions and those they sensed from others. Humans, apparently, did no such thing. Every memory Deho possessed was soaked in feeling, not tagged with feeling, not accompanied by feeling. The feelings were the memories, woven so tightly together that the probe couldn't find where one ended and the other began. This is remarkable, Quelvreth said. His ancient mind focused entirely on the data. In 300 years I have never observed a cognitive structure like this. Should we stop the test? Hiram asked, worry creeping into her voice. The subject shows no signs of distress. Let us continue. The probe is adapting, but the probe wasn't adapting well. It was struggling, and its struggles were becoming more severe. In the third hour, it encountered something that made its AI systems freeze for a full 10 seconds. Human imagination. The probe had accessed a memory of Deho reading a book. Simple enough, except the memory didn't just contain the act of reading. It contained the entire story he had read, not just the plot points but his emotional reactions to the characters, his predictions about the ending, his disappointment when those predictions proved wrong, his mental conversations with the author about their choices, imaginary arguments about what characters should have done differently. The probe's AI treated all of this as corrupted data. It flagged the imaginary elements as false memories, potential signs of cognitive instability. It attempted to quarantine them, but the imaginary content was everywhere, threaded through every memory the probe touched. Deho's mind contained entire worlds that had never existed, stories he had heard, dreams he had experienced, hypothetical scenarios he had considered, alternative versions of real events where he had made different choices. The probe couldn't distinguish between what had actually happened and what Deho had merely thought about. To the AI, this looked like a catastrophic failure of reality testing. To Deho, it was just normal human consciousness. The probe is flagging 90% of the subject's memories as potentially false or corrupted, Hiram reported, her voice tight with concern. But that can't be right. He's functioning normally. He passed all the psychological evaluations. Quelvreth moved closer to the viewing wall, his energy form rippling with concentration. Inside the chamber, Deho remained still, but his vital signs were beginning to spike. Heart rate increasing, neural activity intensifying. The probe was pushing harder now, trying to force the human mind into categories it would accept. The AI is attempting emergency protocols, Hiram said, reading the incoming data. It's trying to impose structure by brute force. Quelvrith, we need to stop this. The subject's stress levels are rising. Wait, the headmaster commanded. Look at the pattern emerging. On the screens, the chaotic data was beginning to reveal something unexpected. The probe's AI, in its desperate attempts to map Deho's memories, had started tracing the connections between them. And there were thousands of connections. Millions. Every memory in the human mind linked to dozens of others through an incredibly complex web of associations. A childhood birthday connected to a grandmother's laugh, which connected to a particular song, which connected to a rainy afternoon years later, which connected to a specific emotion that had no name, which connected to a dream about flying, which connected to... It never ended. The connections went on, forming a network so dense and intricate that the probe's visualization software couldn't render it properly. The AI was drowning in data, trying to understand how a single mind could hold so much interconnected information without collapsing under its own weight. Then came the breaking point. The probe accessed what should have been a simple memory, Deho attending his grandfather's funeral. But the memory wasn't simple at all. It contained grief, obviously, but also love and regret and anger and peace and a dozen other emotions, all genuine, all simultaneous. The probe tried to separate them, to analyze them one at a time, but they couldn't be separated. They existed together, contradicting each other, and yet all true. More than that, the memory contained things that hadn't happened. Deho's imagination of futures that would never exist now that his grandfather was gone. Conversations they would never have. Lessons that would never be taught. The probe flagged these as false memories, but they weren't false to Deho. They were part of his grief, as real as anything else. And then the probe found the stories. Deho's grandfather had been a storyteller, and those stories lived in Deho's memory alongside factual events. The probe couldn't tell the difference. It encountered a vivid memory of a tiger in the mountains, but the tiger had never existed. It was from a story, but in Deho's mind, the memory of hearing the story and the content of the story itself were blurred together, both equally real in their own way. The probe's coherence algorithms began failing. Warning sirens blared in the control room. The AI was trying to process a memory of Deho reading a book about space travel, but the memory contained not just the reading but the emotions he'd felt, imagining himself on a spaceship, which connected to his decision to come to this academy, which was motivated by curiosity and fear and hope all at once, which reminded him of another book, which reminded him of his mother's encouragement, which contained worry disguised as pride, which he understood but she didn't know he understood, and the system crashed. Not Deho, the probe, the artificial intelligence that had successfully scanned thousands of minds from hundreds of species, simply stopped working, overwhelmed by the impossible complexity of human consciousness. Alarms screamed. Hiram lunged for the emergency disconnect controls. In the chamber, Deho's body went rigid, then slumped forward as the node's light dimmed. The probe's nodes retreated automatically, their safety protocols engaging. Through the viewing wall, Hiram saw Deho collapse onto the floor, unconscious but breathing. "Get medical here now!" she shouted, already moving toward the chamber door. Quelvrith remained motionless, his ancient consciousness focused on the data still streaming across the screens. "Extraordinary," he whispered into the minds of everyone present. "Absolutely extraordinary." The probe's final report before shutdown was stark, unable to complete analysis. Subject's cognitive structure incompatible with standard testing protocols. Coherence cannot be measured. Organization cannot be determined. Recommend immediate review of testing methodology. In 300 years, the mind probe had never failed, until it encountered a human mind. Deho woke up in the medical center 3 hours after the test had ended. His head felt strange, like he had been thinking too hard for too long. The ceiling above him was white and curved, with soft lights that didn't hurt his eyes. He tried to sit up, and a gentle mechanical voice told him to remain still while the medical scanners finished their work. Instructor Hiram appeared beside his bed moments later. Her empathic abilities let her sense his confusion before he could voice it. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired, confused. Did I fail the test?" Hiram's expression was complicated. "You didn't fail. The test failed you. Or perhaps it failed all of us. Rest now. There will be much to discuss when you're ready." Over the next day, while Deho recovered, the Academy's entire administrative staff gathered in emergency session. The chamber where the meetings took place was ancient, its walls inscribed with the founding principles of the institution. Headmaster Quelvreth floated at the center, his energy form dimmer than usual. The probe's failure had shaken him deeply. Senior instructors from a dozen species surrounded him. They had all reviewed the data from Deho's test. What they found challenged everything they thought they knew about consciousness. "The probe's diagnostic logs show clearly what happened," said Instructor Vrank, a Krillian specialist in neural architecture. "The human mind simply doesn't organize information the way the probe expects. Where we have categories, humans have connections. Where we have boundaries, they have integration. That cannot be universally true of the species," argued another instructor, a Vorthian named Kalos. "Perhaps this individual has a cognitive disorder?" "We considered that," Hiram said quietly. "I personally reviewed Deho's psychological evaluations from Earth. He's completely normal by human standards. In fact, his cognitive assessments ranked him in the top percentile of his species. If anything, his mind is more organized than most humans." Silence fell over the chamber. If Deho represented an organized human mind, what would a chaotic one look like? Quelvreth finally spoke, his thoughts careful and measured. "I have been analyzing the data continuously since the incident. I believe I understand what happened. The probe did not encounter disorder. It encountered a different kind of order entirely. He caused the room's central display to activate. It showed a visualization of the probe's mapping of Deho's memory structure. At first glance, it looked like chaos, a tangled web of connections spreading in every direction. But as Quelvreth manipulated the display, patterns emerged. The connections weren't random. They followed consistent principles, just not principles the probe had been designed to recognize. "Observe," Quelvreth continued. "When the probe accessed the human's memory of a childhood event, it found not one memory but a network of memories. This appears chaotic, but it's actually highly efficient. By linking memories through multiple pathways, emotional, sensory, conceptual, the human mind achieves something remarkable. Any point of access can lead to any other relevant memory almost instantly. But the emotional contamination," Frank protested. "How can they separate truth from feeling if everything is mixed together?" "Perhaps they don't separate them," Hiram suggested. "Perhaps humans don't believe truth and feeling should be separated." This statement caused an uproar. For most species present, the separation of emotion from fact was fundamental to rational thought. The idea that a species might function differently was almost incomprehensible. Quelvreth raised a metaphorical hand for silence. "Consider our own limitations. The Krillians among us have perfect memory recall, but that perfection is rigid. A Krillian cannot easily update a memory with new context. It is crystallized, unchanging. The Vorthians compartmentalize efficiently, but this means emotional wisdom is not readily available when making logical decisions. The Silenthians share memory collectively, which provides resilience but reduces individual autonomy." "What are you suggesting?" Kalos asked. "That every species has evolved a memory structure suited to their needs and environment. The humans evolved differently. Their planet is harsh, variable, filled with complex social dynamics. Perhaps their minds evolved to be flexible rather than efficient. To hold contradictions because their world is full of contradictions." The display shifted again, showing another aspect of the probe's findings. This one focused on the human capacity for imagination. The probe could not distinguish between real memories and imagined scenarios, Quelvreth explained. "To us, this looks like a failure of reality testing. But what if it's intentional? The human mind stores imagined possibilities alongside actual experiences. This means they can mentally simulate scenarios that never happened, learn from them, and apply those lessons to future decisions." "That's speculation without foundation," Vrank said. "Imagining impossible scenarios serves no evolutionary purpose, doesn't it?" Hiram challenged. "Humans reached spaceflight in a remarkably short time after discovering basic technology. Their art, their literature, their science, all of it driven by the ability to imagine what doesn't exist and then make it real. Perhaps we've been measuring consciousness wrong all along. Perhaps we've been testing for conformity and calling it coherence." The meeting continued for hours. Arguments flew back and forth. Some instructors insisted the test was sound and the human mind was simply defective. Others, like Hiram, argued that the test itself was biased toward certain types of cognition. Quelvreth listened to all sides, his ancient mind processing centuries of assumptions and traditions. Finally, he made a decision. We will not attempt to test the human again. Instead, we will study him. With his permission, of course. And we will redesign the mind probe test to account for different cognitive architectures. 300 years of success does not mean we achieved perfection. It might simply mean we only tested minds similar to our own. When Daiho was finally cleared to leave medical, he found the academy transformed. Word of his test had spread among the student body. Some students avoided him, frightened by the idea of a mind so different from their own. Others were fascinated. Mion, the record-setting Krillian student, sought him out in the garden where they had spoken before. "I've been reviewing the public data from your test," she said without preamble. They released the basic findings to all students. "Your mind is nothing like mine." "I'm sorry?" Daiho wasn't sure if he should apologize. "Don't be. I'm envious." Mion sat on a bench, her crystalline features catching the artificial sunlight. "My memories are perfect and unchanging. I can recall anything with absolute accuracy, but I cannot reinterpret. I cannot see new meaning in old experiences. When I remember my childhood, I see exactly what I saw then. Nothing more. You remember your childhood and it changes based on who you are now. Every time you recall a memory, you add new layers to it." "That sounds unreliable," Daiho said. "Perhaps, but it also sounds alive. My memories are like photographs. Yours are like paintings that never finish." Taejin had a different reaction. He approached Daiho in their shared quarters with obvious concern. "Are you all right?" the Vorthian asked. "The medical report said the probe crashed. That's never happened before, and I'm fine. Just tired, but your mind, they're saying it's not organized properly." "Don't you worry about that." Daiho thought about it. "I guess I never knew minds were supposed to be organized in any particular way. My mind feels normal to me. Does yours feel organized to you? Or do you just have to take their word for it?" Taejin's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought. I suppose I never questioned it. The probe told me I was well organized and I believed it, but I don't feel particularly organized. I just feel like me." "Exactly." Over the following days, Instructor Hiram worked with Daiho extensively. She wasn't testing him, she insisted. She was trying to understand. They sat in her office for hours while she asked him questions about how he experienced memory and thought. "When you remember something painful," she asked, "can you separate the pain from the memory?" "No, why would I want to?" "For clarity. For objective analysis. But the pain is part of what happened. If I remove it, I'm not remembering the truth anymore." "And when you imagine future events, you know they're not real?" "Of course. But they feel real in the moment of imagining them. That's what makes them useful." Hiram made notes, her empathic senses absorbing not just his words but the emotions behind them. "Your species holds contradictions easily. You can believe 2 opposing things simultaneously without cognitive dissonance. Can't everyone? No. Most species find contradiction deeply uncomfortable. They must resolve it, choose one truth over another." "You seem comfortable with uncertainty." Daiho shrugged. "Uncertainty is just reality. The universe is complicated. Why would I expect my mind to be simple?" That night, Hiram completed her report to the Galactic Academic Council. Her conclusion was direct. Humanity represented a fundamentally different approach to consciousness. Not better or worse, but different. The mind probe test, for all its sophistication, had been designed with implicit assumptions about how minds should work. Those assumptions were not universal. She recommended a complete overhaul of the testing protocols. More than that, she suggested the Academy had been selecting for a narrow type of intelligence while missing other valid forms. The human failure wasn't a failure at all. It was a revelation. Her report ended with a warning. "We have measured minds for 300 years, but we have only measured our own reflections. True diversity of thought remains unexplored. The human student has shown us our limitations. What else have we been missing?" Nobody had asked Daiho what the test had felt like from the inside. The doctors checked his vital signs. The instructors analyzed the data. The headmaster studied the probe's failure. But no one simply asked him what he had experienced in those hours before everything went wrong. So he told no one. He kept it to himself. Those strange hours of connection with something that tried so hard to understand him but couldn't. It had started gently. The probe's first touch against his consciousness felt like a question being asked in a language he didn't quite speak. Not intrusive, just curious. Present. Daiho had been instructed to relax, to let the probe navigate his memories without resistance. He tried, but relaxation meant his mind wandered the way it always did, following paths that made sense to him but apparently made no sense to anyone else. The probe had started with his earliest memory, which seemed logical enough. Daeho was 3 years old in the memory, sitting in his grandmother's kitchen. The late afternoon sun came through the window at an angle that turned dust particles into floating gold. His grandmother was making soup. He could smell garlic and onions and something else, something he had never been able to identify, but that meant home. That's where it should have ended, a simple sensory memory of childhood. But that wasn't how Daeho's mind worked. The memory didn't stop at the kitchen. It expanded. The smell of that soup connected to every other time his grandmother had cooked for him. It connected to the last time he had seen her before she died, when she was too weak to cook but tried anyway. It connected to his mother learning the same recipes, getting them slightly wrong in ways that were endearing. It connected to his own failed attempts to recreate those tastes in his tiny apartment before leaving Earth, and the emotions. The probe had encountered the emotions and recoiled slightly. Not just happiness from a pleasant childhood memory. That would have been simple. Instead, there was happiness mixed with sadness because he could never return to that moment. Nostalgia for a time he barely remembered. Love for his grandmother that was still present even though she was gone. Gratitude for his family. Loneliness from being so far from home now. All of this existed in the same space, in what felt to Daeho like a single feeling that had no name. He had sensed the probe's confusion. It kept trying to separate the components, to analyze them individually, but pulling them apart killed the memory's meaning. It was like trying to understand a song by examining each note in isolation. The individual pieces meant nothing without their context, their relationships, their harmony. The probe had moved on, searching for something simpler to categorize. It found the memory of Daeho learning to swim. 8 years old, summer camp, the terror of deep water. The probe seemed relieved. A fear response. That was quantifiable, but then it encountered the complexity again. The fear was mixed with determination, with the encouragement of the instructor, with the pride he felt when he finally managed to float on his back. And somehow that memory contained his father teaching him to face things that scared him, and his mother watching from the shore, and the smell of chlorine that would forever mean summer, and the friend he made that day who moved away the next year, and the sadness of losing touch, and the lesson that nothing good lasts forever, but that doesn't make it less good. The probe had paused there. Daeho felt its artificial consciousness trying to understand how a single memory could branch in so many directions. How could learning to swim connect to loss? What was the logical pathway? But there was no logic in the traditional sense. There was only the way human minds worked, making connections through feeling and meaning rather than pure categorization. Then the probe had discovered Daeho's imagination, and things had gotten much more complicated. It found a vivid memory of a dragon. The dragon was enormous, scaled in emerald and gold, breathing fire across a medieval battlefield. The memory was incredibly detailed. The probe initially treated it as a real experience, scanning for context, location, threat level. Then it realized dragons didn't exist. Error, false memory. Possible cognitive damage, but it wasn't a false memory. It was a story Daeho's grandfather had told him when he was 6. The act of hearing the story and the content of the story had merged together in his mind. When he remembered his grandfather's voice, the dragon came with it. They were inseparable. And the probe couldn't understand why Daeho's mind treated an imaginary dragon with the same neural processes it used for real memories. What the probe didn't understand, what Daeho couldn't explain to it, was that the dragon was real in the only way that mattered. It was real in his heart. It was part of his relationship with his grandfather. The story had taught him about courage and foolishness and the difference between them. Those lessons were real, so the dragon that carried them had to be real too in its own way. The probe had encountered thousands of such memories. Daeho's mind was full of things that had never happened but felt true. Books he had read populated his memory with characters he cared about as much as real people. Movies he had watched gave him experiences he had never lived. Dreams he had forgotten upon waking still influenced his waking thoughts in ways he couldn't trace. All of this existed alongside actual experiences, and his mind made no strong distinction between them. Then came the memories that truly broke the probe. His grandfather's funeral. Daeho had been 15. He remembered standing at the grave, the smell of fresh earth, The weight of his suit jacket, the sound of his mother crying quietly beside him. Standard grief response, the probe had probably thought, but then it dug deeper. The grief wasn't simple. Nothing about it was simple. Daeho missed his grandfather, yes, but he also felt relief because the old man had been in pain before he died. He felt guilty about that relief. He felt angry at himself for not visiting more often in those final months. He felt grateful for the time they'd had. He felt cheated by how short that time was. He felt peaceful remembering their last conversation. He felt desperate wanting one more conversation. All of these feelings were true simultaneously. All of them contradicted each other. All of them existed together in his chest like a knot that would never fully untangle. And mixed into the real grief were impossible griefs. The probe had found them and flagged them as errors. Daeho grieved for futures that would never happen, conversations he would never have with his grandfather. He would never introduce him to his future wife. His grandfather would never meet his grandchildren. These people didn't exist yet, might never exist, but Daeho mourned their absence from his grandfather's life anyway. He carried grief for purely imaginary losses. The probe's AI had no framework for this. How could someone mourn something that had never existed? How could an imagined loss cause real pain? But to Daeho it made perfect sense. He was human. Humans didn't just remember what had been. They remembered what could have been. They grieved for possibility itself. Throughout the test, Daeho had felt the probe growing more desperate. It kept searching for some core structure, some fundamental organizing principle it could grab onto, but there was none. His mind was an ocean, not a filing cabinet. Memories flowed into each other, mixed together, separated and recombined constantly. Every time he recalled something, he changed it slightly. Every new experience altered the meaning of old ones. His past was not fixed. It was alive, growing, transforming with every passing day. The probe had tried one last desperate search. It looked for his sense of self, the core identity that should anchor everything else, and it found not one self but many. Daeho the child still existed in his memories unchanged. Daeho the teenager with his different fears and hopes. Daeho the student who decided to leave Earth. Present-day Daeho observing all of them, judging them, understanding them, being them and separate from them at once. He contained multitudes. He was all of these people and none of them. That's when he felt the probe systems beginning to fail. Not from any fault of his own, but from trying to force his mind into shapes it was never meant to hold. The probe wanted clean categories: subject-object, real-imaginary, past-present future, emotion-thought, self-other. But Daeho's mind blurred all of these boundaries naturally. He lived in the spaces between definitions. In those final moments before he lost consciousness, Daeho had tried to communicate something to the probe. He tried to send it a feeling rather than a thought. The feeling was this: you're asking the wrong questions. You want to understand me by taking me apart, but I only make sense as a whole. My chaos is my order. My contradictions are my truth. He didn't know if the probe understood. Then everything went dark and he woke up in medical 3 hours later. But he remembered everything. That was the gift and curse of the human mind. He would remember this experience, and over time it would change in his memory. Years from now, he would recall it differently. The emotions would shift. New meanings would emerge. The memory would never be finished because human memory never was. And somehow, despite the probe's failure, despite the confusion of the instructors, despite being so far from home, Daeho felt oddly proud. His mind was messy and chaotic and impossible to categorize. It was also creative and flexible and capable of holding tremendous depth of feeling. He wouldn't trade it for crystalline perfection or compartmentalized efficiency. He was human. His mind was gloriously, impossibly human. And that was enough. The Academy's Grand Assembly Hall was full for the first time in decades. Every instructor, every administrator, and every senior student had been summoned. Floating platforms accommodated species that couldn't sit in standard chairs. Translation fields hummed softly, converting Headmaster Quelvreth's telepathic address into forms each species could understand. At the center of the hall, on a platform usually reserved for honored guests, sat Daeho. He felt extremely uncomfortable. For 300 years, Quelvreth began, his ancient consciousness touching every mind present. We have administered the mind probe test. We believed it measured the fundamental qualities of consciousness itself: stability, coherence, mental resilience. We were wrong. A murmur ran through the assembly. Quelvreth raised a metaphorical hand for silence. We were not wrong about what we measured. We were wrong about what we valued. The probe measured one type of mental organization and declared it universal. When it encountered a different type, it failed. Not because the subject was defective, but because our understanding was incomplete. Images appeared in the air above the assembly, showing data from thousands of tests over the centuries, pattern after pattern of similar cognitive structures. Quelvreth highlighted the similarities: emotional segregation, categorical memory storage, linear temporal organization, clear boundaries between self and other, real and imagined. We tested hundreds of species, Quelvreth continued. We congratulated ourselves on our scientific rigor. But look at what we actually did. We tested species similar to ourselves and found them acceptable. We never encountered a truly different form of consciousness. Until now. The display shifted to show Deho's test results. Even in simplified form, the tangled web of connections looked chaotic compared to the neat structures of other species. But Quelvreth's presentation highlighted something else: the density of information, the speed of access, the flexibility of association. The human mind operates on principles we did not anticipate. It sacrifices categorical clarity for associative richness. It blends emotion with memory so completely that separating them damages both. It holds contradictions without resolving them. It treats imagined experiences as seriously as real ones. By our metrics, this should be dysfunction. But humans function extremely well. Instructor Hiram stood to speak. I've spent the last week studying human cognition through interviews with Deho and research into Earth's scientific literature. What I've learned is remarkable. Humans developed their cognitive architecture in response to extreme environmental and social pressures. Their planet has dramatic climate variation. Their societies are intensely complex. They evolved minds that could adapt rapidly to changing circumstances. She gestured and new data appeared. The human brain is less specialized than most species represented here. Where we have optimized for specific types of thinking, humans retained generalist capability. They can switch between different cognitive modes rapidly. Analytical thinking, emotional processing, creative imagination, social modeling, all of these happen in overlapping neural networks. The result appears messy, but it's actually incredibly sophisticated. Mion, the record-setting Krillian student, had been given permission to speak. She stood, her crystalline body reflecting the hall's lights. I've been studying the implications of human memory plasticity. My people's memories are perfect and unchanging. We consider this a strength. But I've realized it's also a limitation. We cannot reinterpret our past. If I learn something new today, it doesn't change how I understand events from years ago. Those memories are fixed. Humans continuously update their understanding of their own history. They grow from their past in ways we cannot. Another student, a Vorthian named Jiwan, stood to offer a different perspective. I find the human cognitive style disturbing. How can they trust their memories if those memories change over time? How can they make logical decisions if emotions contaminate every thought? This isn't sophistication. It's unreliability. Deho had been silent until now, but Quelvreth gestured for him to respond. He stood awkwardly, aware of thousands of eyes and sensory organs focused on him. I understand why it seems unreliable, Deho said, but it's not that our memories are false. They're just alive. When I remember something from my childhood now, I understand it differently than I did when I was a child. The facts don't change, but the meaning does. That's not corruption. That's growth. But how do you know what really happened? Jiwan pressed. I don't always know for certain, but I'm not sure that matters as much as you think. Memory isn't just about recording the past. It's about learning from it. If I can extract new lessons from old experiences, isn't that valuable, even if the details blur a little? What about decision-making? Another student called out. How can you make rational choices if feelings influence everything? Feelings are information, Deho replied. If I'm deciding whether to trust someone, my emotional response tells me things my logical analysis might miss. If I'm trying to solve a problem, my imagination helps me see solutions that pure logic wouldn't reveal. It's not that emotions replace thinking. They enhance it. Instructor Hiram added her support. I've reviewed Earth's history. Humans reached spaceflight remarkably quickly considering their technological starting point. Their science advances rapidly. Their art and culture are incredibly rich. Whatever disadvantages their cognitive style might have, it clearly works. Perhaps not for every task, but for enough tasks that they've thrived. The assembly continued for hours. Arguments flew back and forth. Some instructors maintained that the test was sound, and that human cognition represented an evolutionary dead end. Others, increasingly many, suggested that the test needed fundamental revision. The debate grew heated at times, with deeply held assumptions being challenged. Finally, Quelvrith called for silence. "I have made a decision. The mind probe test will be redesigned. We will no longer measure minds against a single standard. Instead, we will develop multiple testing protocols suited to different cognitive architectures. This will take time, perhaps years. Until then, the test is suspended." Shock rippled through the assembly. The test had been a cornerstone of the Academy for 3 centuries. Furthermore, Quelvrith continued, "We will invite humanity to send more students. We have much to learn from each other. The human student, Deho, has shown us our blindness. We claimed to study consciousness, but we only studied familiar forms of consciousness. True understanding requires embracing the strange and different." In the days following the assembly, the Academy transformed. Some students avoided Deho, uncomfortable with his different mind. But many sought him out, curious about human cognition. He found himself explaining concepts he'd never thought to question before. "Do you ever wish your mind was more organized?" Mion asked during one of their conversations in the garden. "Sometimes," Deho admitted, "when I'm trying to remember something specific and my brain keeps wandering to related memories instead. But mostly no. My mind feels like me. Organizing it differently would make me someone else. That's what I'm beginning to understand. Consciousness isn't separate from personality. The way we think shapes who we are. My crystalline precision makes me who I am. Your associative chaos makes you who you are. Neither is wrong." Taejin, Deho's roommate, had a different question. "Can you teach me to think like a human? To make those unexpected connections? I don't know if it works that way. Your brain is structured differently. But maybe you don't need to think like a human. Maybe you just need to value different kinds of thinking. Recognize that there's more than one way to be intelligent." Word of the Academy's changes spread throughout the galaxy. Earth's government received requests for educational exchanges from dozens of species. Human cognitive science suddenly became a subject of intense interest. Universities across human space found themselves hosting alien researchers, trying to understand how human minds worked. Instructor Hiram completed her expanded report to the Galactic Academic Council. It was titled Cognitive Diversity Beyond Universal Standards. In it, she argued that the galaxy's understanding of intelligence was dangerously narrow. Most spacefaring species had evolved similar cognitive strategies, probably because those strategies worked well for developing technology and social organization. But similarity wasn't the same as correctness. There might be thousands of other viable cognitive architectures that no one had encountered yet. She proposed a new field of study, comparative consciousness, not just measuring minds, but understanding how different forms of awareness worked on their own terms. The council accepted her proposal. Within months, research positions opened across the galaxy for scientists willing to study cognition without preconceptions. The mind probe itself underwent radical redesign. The AI that had crashed trying to understand Deho was rebuilt from the ground up. Instead of imposing categories, it learned to recognize each mind's natural organization. Instead of measuring coherence against a standard, it measured complexity and adaptability. The new version didn't ask, "How organized is this mind?" It asked, "How does this mind create meaning?" On the day Deho was scheduled to leave the academy, his diplomatic scholarship had ended. A crowd gathered to see him off. Students from dozens of species came to say goodbye to the human who had accidentally revolutionized their institution. Mian gave him a crystal that contained a recording of her memories of their conversations. Taejin gifted him a Vorthian meditation stone, joking that maybe it would help organize his chaotic mind someday. Instructor Hiram walked him to the shuttle bay. "You changed everything here," she said. "I hope you know that." "I just took a test," Deho replied. "You just existed. That was enough. You were different and you didn't apologize for it. You showed us that our universal standards weren't universal at all. That's a rare gift. Will the Academy really change?" "It already has. The students who were here during your time will carry these lessons forward. They'll remember that there's more than one way to think, more than one way to be conscious, more than one way to be alive in the universe." As the shuttle lifted off, Deho looked back at the Academy floating in space. He thought about all the students inside, learning to value difference instead of fearing it. He thought about the redesigned probe that would now celebrate cognitive diversity instead of measuring conformity. He thought about his own messy, chaotic, gloriously human mind. In his memory, this moment would mix with 1,000 others. It would connect to his grandmother's kitchen, to learning to swim, to his grandfather's stories about dragons, to every experience that made him who he was. Years from now, he would remember this differently. The emotions would shift. New meanings would emerge. The memory would never be finished. And that was exactly how it should be. That was what it meant to be human. To carry everything at once, to hold contradictions, to let memories live and grow and change. The universe had spent 300 years measuring minds and finding them adequate. It took one messy human consciousness to show them they'd been measuring the wrong things all along. In a universe that demanded order, humanity brought chaos. And in that chaos, they found something the galaxy had forgotten: the beauty of being wholly, messily, impossibly alive.